So I'm looking at the screen. So I've got speaker, I've got pro tem. Oh, Gene, there you are. And the minority leader on the House side. There you are, Tom. Okay, we've got full crew then. All right, so I know several of us have things at 2. This should be a super quick agenda. First thing up, consideration, possible approval of request for an additional interim day for the Robert G. Bethel Joint Committee on the CanCare oversight. JG? JG, you explain what's going on there?
Yes, sir. The Bob Bethel Joint Committee on Home and Community-Based Services and CanCare is requesting one day. They have to meet quarterly. They've met in January. They're asking for one day in April 22nd to meet. You will get another request after the interim starts for additional days, but they're requesting one day for the April meeting to meet their statutory requirement.
Very good. So do I need a motion on this authorization? So I got a move by Representative Hawkins. Do I have a second?
Second.
I think was that you, Ron?
It could have been, but it was actually Finch.
That wasn't. So which one was it really? Oh, Finch. All right, seconded by Representative Finch. Discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
Aye.
Motion passes. Second item, consideration possible approval of legislative budget committee recommendations. JG?
Yes, Mr. Chair. The last session, in the 2020 session, there was a coronavirus response account set up with $50 million for 2020. The Legislative Budget Committee had recommended and the LCC had approved expenditures of a little over $30 million. So there's $19.7 million still in that account right now. One of the last items that the previous LCC committee had discussed was the expenditure of $1.3 million for the state fair and $1 million for the local health departments. They decided to postpone that and let the new LCC decide on whether they wanted to make those appropriations or not. So the Kansas State Fair had a shortfall that they had estimated for 2023 of $2.3 million. The LCC previously had recommended $1 million in a transfer to them, leaving 1.3. At the December meeting, the LBC had recommended the additional 1.3 million, and now that's what's before the LCC right now is the $1.3 million. Do you want me to go over the local health departments now or hold off?
Yeah, go ahead and go over both of them.
Okay, thank you. The local health department had originally requested a little over $4 million. The Legislative Budget Committee had looked at that and thought that a fair amount of that could be covered with the upcoming COVID money, and most of it was. The previous session had appropriated about $900,000 to the local health departments to help with the upcoming COVID problem. The governor had allotted that money. The Legislative Budget Committee then turned in a request to the LCC in a form of a recommendation to transfer the additional $1 million to the legislative or to the local health departments. They normally are appropriated a total of $2.2 million. So this would be the $1 million on top of the current appropriation.
Committee, you have questions for JG? Hey, JG, how are these handled in the underlying budget at this point?
Very good question. The local health departments, both the House and Senate, has tentatively added some money, your Ways and Means and Appropriations Committee, of 1.5 million and $1 million. The Senate had 1.5, the House had $1 million. They were not sure on whether or not the LCC was going to meet again to make this appropriation. So they do have stuff tentatively included in their budgets. The House also has tentatively appropriated $1 million for or $1.3 million, I'm sorry, for the state fair. The House or the Senate has not made that appropriation yet. So both of those were contingent upon what was happening with the LCC.
Any further questions?
Mr. President, I have a question or a comment.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, we delayed this last time because we weren't sure the second round of CARES money would be able to use for this. And I think we found out that it could not. And so I think that's why it's been delayed till now.
Very good. So do I have a motion? We have a motion to approve by Representative Hawkins. Do I have a second? It's going to die for second by Speaker Reichman.
Yes.
We have a set motion and a second. Further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion passes. Final item on the agenda is appointment of a redistricting advisory group. And this is for the purpose, we understand it, to make some of the just kind of advisory decisions. Senate, for example, has not defined its redistricting committee yet, but understand there are decisions that need to be made sooner rather than later. And this will establish the group to do that. So this is just the motion to create the committee. Who else? Jason, do you want to explain this?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. You do have a memo in your packet that kind of highlights the legal process for redistricting for next year in 2022 as required under the state constitution and Article 10. Those bills are generally, reapportionment bills are generally handled like any other bills. There oftentimes are special rules for amendment to avoid creating gaps and overlaps in the reapportionment plans. And then, of course, there is a special provision in the Constitution that those bills have to be reviewed by the Kansas Supreme Court and deemed valid by the Kansas Supreme Court before they can be effective for the election cycle. And so because of that additional step in obtaining legal validation of those reapportionment plans, typically the redistricting advisory group has adopted guidelines for the special redistricting committees of the House and Senate to follow when considering reapportionment bills next year in their respective committees. I did attach a memo that I drafted back in 2009 outlining those legal guidelines. The redistricting advisory group then adopted those guidelines for the 2012 cycle. They were also the same guidelines that were adopted for the 2002 redistricting cycle, so nothing new under the sun there. And then I did want to remind you that we didn't have a reapportionment plan in 2012, so there was no petition to the Supreme Court or validation on those grounds because there was no plan to review. Instead, it went through federal district court with the lawsuit, and the three-judge panel drew the maps that are in effect right now. In addition to the redistricting advisory group, typically, there's also appointed a joint committee in the interim between the year ending in 1 and the year ending in 2, so this upcoming interim. That joint committee last time consisted of the members of both the House and the Senate special redistricting committees, and that was the group that conducted the town hall meetings through different portions of the state to gather input from those regions of the state prior to the legislature reconvening in January. And I staffed both the advisory group and the joint committee last year, as well as both the House and Senate special redistricting committees in 2012. So I'm well familiar with the workings of how we're going to do this next year. If the committee has any questions, I'd be happy to answer at this time.
Committee questions for Jason? How do you guys tell if there's somebody raising their hand if there's nobody but me on the screen? All right. All right, got it. Blaine had one. Representative Finch.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. Jason, what is the typical composition of the advisory group? Who's on it? How many members?
I believe the last time around it's been 6 members of the committee. I think Legislative Research has a memo that they provided that provides the membership breakdown, but it's basically been the leadership of the House and the Senate the last couple times around.
Thank you.
Is Joanna here? Does she want to explain the document or?
I think she's.
Oh, she's online. All right. Joanna,
Thank
you
you,
want to go over your document?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As Jason said, historically, the LCC has appointed a small group of legislators to conduct the initial planning in the years leading up to redistricting, and that's been the Redistricting Advisory Group. That has historically been made up of 6 members, 2 from the majority party and 1 from the minority party of each chamber. And the LCC has authorized that group just to meet as they need to. In the 2 most recent cycles, the advisory group made initial recommendations concerning things like meeting dates and the scope of the advisory group, guidelines and rules for redistricting, as Jason said, designating the staff agency responsible for the initial organizing and planning of redistricting, as well as the organization of the work to be done by the legislature in actually conducting its redistricting. As Jason mentioned, the town hall meetings, as well as actual map creation. They also did approval of training, software, and other technical items, and looked at any sort of legal or statutory changes that needed to be made in preparation for redistricting, as well as any budgetary recommendations that came up. So they're just the group that handled redistricting considerations until the special committee, which was made up of both standing committees last time, started meeting in the summer of the year ending in 1. That's a really quick overview of some of the history. I'm happy to answer any questions there are.
Committee, any questions for Joanna? And I'd remind everybody that this is just creation of this motion, be just to create the group. All these individual decisions will be made then by the group. Are there questions for Joanna? Seeing none, I'd take a motion. Representative Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to establish a 6-member redistricting advisory group to make the necessary preliminary preparations for the 2022 redistricting of legislative districts, state board of education districts, congressional districts, and congressional districts following the 2020 federal census. The advisory group shall have 3 members from the Senate, of which 2 members shall be appointed by the president and 1 shall be appointed by the Senate minority leader, and 3 members from the House of Representatives, of which 2 members shall be appointed by the Speaker and 1 shall be appointed by the House Minority Leader. The President and Speaker shall jointly appoint the chairperson and the vice chairperson. The advisory group is authorized to meet 4 days in Topeka and as approved by the LCC.
Chair will second. Is there discussion on the motion? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion passes. With no further business before us, LCC is adjourned.